guys, Drew here. I am live from my closet in Savannah, Georgia. Just wanted to pop in at the top of the episode to say thanks for listening, as well as to let y'all know that this episode was recorded on October 9th, 2021. It's taken so long to get this released because we wanted to make sure everything was just right before we put it out to the world. But that being said, we're definitely still learning how this whole podcasting thing works, so bear with us if the audio quality isn't, quite yet up to par with what you're used to. We're going to be experimenting with different audio setups throughout the next few episodes, but we should have everything set up the way we want it soon. I also wanted to go ahead and plug a few things since we forgot to do so during the actual recording. So first, our Instagram is at Oliphaunts_MC. That's OLIPHAUNTS_MC. Our email is oliphauntsmotorclub@gmail.com. Our YouTube is Oliphaunts Motorcycle Club. My Twitter is at Drew Felt. That's DREWFELT. And Matthew's Twitter is at mute_Matthew. That's MUTE_MATTHEW. Finally, we know that some people prefer to have the podcast in an audio and video format. So if you want to watch me play Minecraft while you listen to the episode, check out our YouTube channel for that. Again, that YouTube channel is Oliphaunts Motorcycle Club, and the link to that and all of the other plugs will be in the show notes for this episode. I think that's everything, so without further ado, let's get on with the show.
Hello and welcome to Oliphaunts Motorcycle Club, a podcast where we read through the Lord of the Rings books and come together to discuss what we think is interesting, what we think is funny, and also just to kind of talk about whatever the hell, because this is not an academic podcast. This is a jokes podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Matthew. With me, as always, is my good friend and co-host, Drew. How you doing, Drew?
Pretty good. I'm really excited to get this going, to be perfectly honest, I've never read these books all the way through, and so it'll be just nice to, really get my hands in it and just finally finish these books.
Yeah. So for the people listening at home, you might be wondering why two random guys just decided to start a podcast about Lord of the Rings when A, there's probably a million podcasts about Lord of the Rings, and B, there's been a million conversation books about them. There's movies, there's extended universe stuff for everything that Tolkien has worked on.
Yeah, we're not gonna be, unearthing any new opinions or thoughts about Lord of the Rings, really. Anything profound that is about the works of Tolkien, but it's something that I think we agree that we definitely enjoy talking about it, and I think that some good conversations can come from us reading this book together.
Yeah, and I referenced it earlier, but we are not trying to look necessarily. If it comes up in our discussions, we might talk about things like themes of the book or stuff related to the overall message and content. Mm-hmm. But this is exclusively just an excuse for two good friends who have known each other for a very long time and now live about 4 hours away from one another to have an excuse to get together and have something shared between friends. So getting a little sappy.
Yeah.
So before we talk about what the show's format is going to be and what all we're going to cover, why don't we talk a little bit about how Lord of the Rings and just the Hobbit and everything that Tolkien has made has kind of been a part of our lives up to this point.
Yeah. So I grew up watching the movies and stuff like that. My family, Matthew, you've attended since probably 8th grade or so. My family has always done a yearly marathon of the movies. And it's definitely, my dad read the books and really liked them. My sister read the books as well. I guess didn't have the attention span when I was younger to really sit down and read all of the, long descriptions and stuff like that Tolkien put into his works. But now I think at my 22 years of age, almost 23 years, I think I'm finally ready to really tackle it.
Oh yeah, you finally crested that mountaintop.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I don't know, but despite never having read them, I was always just completely enchanted, but like so many people, by the imagination that it was took, and really it's basically like the cornerstone for the entire modern fantasy genre and stuff like that. And I just have so much respect for that seemed natural that I would at some point do something like this.
Yeah, and folks, he'll be modest about it, but Drew is actively writing his own fictional universe. So, this is also a little bit of an exercise in seeing, I assume at least for you, seeing a really good example in depth. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
and I will say, just in case you want to, so this is a read-along podcast, and so if you want to do reading along with us, we didn't want to, blindside you first day of school, you didn't do the readings, and stuff like that. So we did, if you want to pause right now, we did read just the prologue to talk about during this episode of Fellowship of the Ring, just the prologue. So if you want to add we're going to talk about other stuff for a little bit before then, but just a heads up, if you want to do that, so that you can keep up with what we're talking about, with it fresh in your mind, feel free to do that, and we'll make sure we put out what each subsequent episode, what part of the book that'll be about.
Yeah, we're waiting. Pause it and read it. Do it. But kind of going back to the impetus for the show, and related to you being really interested in fantasy story construction, I would say a common thread for both of us, not just in these properties, but across a lot of different stories and movies and books, is just how much we love lore.
Yeah.
As I've gotten older, I've appreciated a lot of the thematic elements of stories a lot more. But there's just something about, having multiple languages that you've created weaved into a narrative, that is just incredibly impressive to me.
A mythos of its own that's I'm sure that there's some, I don't know exactly what the Lord of the Rings wiki is called, but I'm sure it's basically as in-depth as Wikipedia is in terms of the level of detail that some pages have.
I think it might be called Wookiee Wiki, probably.
Yeah, I was surprised there were no Wookiees in this yet.
Well, we just read through the prologue, Drew.
Yeah,
they're coming. They might even be in the Two Towers. We don't know yet.
Concerning Wookiees.
A picture of Dorian Wookiee. Oh, yeah. You can probably tell how much we like the lore from how much we're about to just go off the rails constantly. But we're hoping that's what you come to the show for. We're going to sound like we're being serious a lot of the times because we do care about these stories.
Yeah, we were good students, and, it's in our nature. We only very recently finished college, so.
Yeah, but what is really fun for us and what we hope is fun for you is us just, being boneheads when we read these and looking for jokes to make. Because in my experience, that's way more fun to listen to than two knuckleheads who are dry as hell. So we're still getting our footing because always the podcastee, never the podcaster. Am I right? We both listen to a ton of different shows, but this is our first time trying our hand at anything related to show construction, audio engineering. It's gonna take a little bit before we get really tight with it. So
right, yeah, and we just spent several hours doing a lot of the technical stuff, and so hopefully everything is where it should be. But bear with us if first couple of episodes are kind of an ugly duckling.
Yeah, by our 25th anniversary of the show, we'll hopefully be a little bit better at it. So if you can stick around with us till then. Hey, maybe we'll get you a reduced subscription to our Patreon that we'll have in probably 6 months.
Yeah. Our $1,000 tier 3 will be $999 for you.
Yes. because you warm our hearts so. Well, we've touched on it a little bit, but why don't we kind of run through what most episodes will look like?
Yeah, so full disclosure, we mentioned earlier that we live like about 200 miles apart currently. I live in Savannah, Georgia. Matthew lives in Athens, Georgia. So that's basically opposite ends of the state. And so we're going to luckily I have family in Athens, and so I'll be coming up here fairly frequently as is, but schedule's going to, at least for recording, is probably going to look like we're going to record 2-ish episodes per recording session, and it'll be every 2 or so weeks as well. So hopefully, we haven't really talked about releasing, but I think we're both in agreement that it'll probably be about weekly that it's released.
Yeah.
And for each episode, it should be about 2 chapters per episode. As the show evolves, we might decide that it works better if we do 3 chapters per episode, or maybe only 1 chapter per episode. We don't have a due date by when we need to have the books read by.
Because, hey, some of us are graduate students, and, hey, 60 pages is hard enough when it's, assigned for a grade.
Yeah.
When it's just for fun, it can kind of suck the fun out of it. But the other part of that Drew just brought up is that this isn't necessarily going to be talking about current events or anything. So
yeah,
don't feel like you have to keep up with weekly releases, because this is, progress in the story-based episode releases rather than related to anything going on at the moment. So,
yeah,
beyond that, we're hoping to touch on all 3 books, probably watch the movies either after we get through all 3 books or maybe in sequence after each book, and do a comparison between the books and the movies, just because I get the sense that a lot of people have seen the movies, extended or theatrical release versions.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have read the books, but fewer even than
Right.
have experience with the movie. So we do want to throw that in there for those of you who maybe are coming to The Lord of the Rings from a more informal place.
Yeah. Yeah, we want to make it clear that, even though we do have our own personal experiences going back through childhood with these stories in the world of Tolkien in general, it's, if you've never read it and you're looking for because, with any big, for lack of a better term, fandom, there's anything big like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or anything like that. There's a humongous amount of gatekeeping for who's the real fans and stuff like that. And it can be intimidating, I think, to really see if it's something for you when, there's so much about you can only really enjoy it if you dedicate your entire life to enjoying it. And, hopefully this doesn't become anything like that.
Yeah. So if you're interested in dipping your toes in the water of Lord of the Rings, and want a couple of dummies to tell you about it first, this will be the podcast for you, my friend.
Yeah, and you're, of course, welcome to read along with us, and that we're obviously laying out the episode schedules in such a way that you can read along with us. But don't feel like you have to either to enjoy it. Hopefully, we're going to be trying to lay down what happened in each chapter every episode, and so you should be able to follow along more or less with the story just from the information that we provide, even if it isn't what Tolkien wrote down. You should at least the story beats should be there, hopefully.
Yeah.
And so however you want to enjoy this podcast is balls in your court for that.
And we want to make it very clear, this is not just Lord of the Rings talk. We're going to be catching up with one another on the pod. We're going to be going down any number of rabbit holes. I would love to talk about music and stuff that's going on in our lives and all kinds of stuff, just so that there's a little bit of a hey, we kind of mix it up a little bit, keep it fresh for the people.
Yeah.
But there will be whole bonus episodes. I am positive.
Yeah.
Where we just are devoted to single topics.
Right.
Yeah,
and so there might be a random episode that's either released in the same instead of a Lord of the Rings episode that comes about like as that week's episode that could be about something completely random that is unrelated. We'll try to, I guess, let y'all know that type of stuff ahead of time so that, you don't get ahead in the reading if you don't want to or anything like that. But yeah, and it could also be that we decide to release 2 episodes in 1 week or something. Just sort of depends.
Yeah, and
playing it loosey-goosey.
Just a preview for the people if you like Jim Croce or Red Hot Chili Peppers or The Far Side
or kombucha
or power rankings of Athens versus Savannah. Hey, we got stuff coming down the pipeline for you. Yeah. So don't you worry.
And we'll have guests.
Yeah.
We both, believe it or not, have girlfriends who also listen to podcasts.
Yeah. I think they might just say that to spare our feelings.
Yeah, could be. And yeah, we have other friends too that I think would be into it, either to talk about Lord of the Rings or to talk about anything else. We're definitely open to suggestions as well, as far as making it a more fun listening experience.
Well, I think that just about covers what we're doing and why we're doing it. Do you want to go ahead and jump into a discussion of the prologue?
Yeah, sure. I know. So, full disclosure, probably every time that we're talking about the readings, Matthew's going to have better notes than me.
Hey,
Matthew, do you have anything from the very beginning? Oh, actually, I do have something I wanted to say. So I really talking about the how much we appreciate world building and lore and stuff like that, and Tolkien was also clearly very into that kind of stuff, and I like that you can definitely see his academic perspective in how the prologue is written, because each chapter is titled, or each section of the prologue is titled in a way that it feels like a like academic journal that was written during the time period that Tolkien would have been writing real academic journals as the head of the English department in Cambridge or Oxford or wherever he worked.
One of those silly ass English places.
Yeah, who knows?
Well, I'm gonna back up real quick. I did take a couple of notes on the forward to the book.
Oh right. I didn't read that.
So, well, some of us do the complete reading and answer in class, and some of us don't, it seems. No. Well, the very first thing you encounter is something that even if you've never read the books or seen the movies, you've probably at least heard the one ring to rule them all spiel. And I'm just saying, hey, count the rings. Yankees, they got 27 of them. You know how many were created for the races of men, elves, and dwarves? Only like 20. So, they're at least somewhere between Tom Brady and the New York Yankees, but we need to get some more rings in here, man.
Yeah.
Why didn't they just make another ring of power? Anyways, so the forward to the book is kind of interesting because, talking about that academic perspective, it's just Tolkien talking self-referentially about the reception to the book, which I thought was kind of interesting as a prelude to actually encountering it. Mm-hmm. So, Drew, how familiar are you with a lot of the criticisms of The Lord of the Rings or Tolkien in general?
Not particularly familiar with it. I don't know much about his personal life, honestly. I know that he fought in World War I.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
He certainly lived through it.
I know that he was a soldier.
Wow.
And I know that he was friends with C.S. Lewis, and I know that they, I think, got in some spirited debates at points about their approach to, because they were both I think pretty Christian and obviously interested in fantasy writing.
Yeah.
And I think that they had different philosophical approaches to merging those two things.
Yeah. I want to be very upfront that to the extent that either Tolkien or the Lord of the Rings books are problematic, this is not an endorsement of them. This is just our appreciation of them. And we'll talk. We don't want to shy away from the critical parts, but this is mostly for fun. So like, we're also not trying to be downers about anything. But yeah, like I think the biggest thing that came to mind that I've read about separately from this is that people hated these books when they came out.
Oh, really?
Not because of the messaging or anything like that. They just thought it was poorly written, like long-winded. I mean, I feel like a lot of people that I've talked to that have read the books complain about them being very long and drawn out. And we'll get into that when we talk about the prologue, because there's some pretty infamous sections in there. But yeah, like, matter of fact, C.S. Lewis was one of like his biggest proponents for getting a Nobel Prize for literature related to writing the books. But people slammed his writing like pretty much universally, and it's only been in the latter half of the 20th century and the 21st century that it's really gotten appreciated at the anywhere near the level that it is today. So I just think that's interesting. But some of the more common criticisms or like knocks on the book are that it's like clearly just an allegory for, in particular, World War II, which is interesting because he actually points out in the foreword, and I made a note of this, he was writing almost all of this before World War II even happened. And so like he says like if there are things that are like incidentally related to real life, it's kind of like the disclaimer in movies, right, where it's like any similarities to real life are purely coincidental. It's like that's kind of the one of his points, but also
old man Tolkien just trying not to get sued.
Yeah. Well, he says like he puts very earnestly, and I'm tempted to believe him as someone who wants to be really good at creative writing but struggles especially with fictional creative writing. He just said he wanted to do an exercise in writing a really long, really in-depth fantasy story. And I think that whether in principle or in practice is kind of our approach to these books. It's an appreciation for them as an epic, really, rather than like an endorsement of the themes that are examined to the extent that they are, or just like being super fans of particular characters or anything. I, regardless of in practice whether there are problematic elements to this, I really just like them as an exploration of how well crafted something can be. And it seems like he could be misrepresenting himself, but it seems like that's earnestly what he's trying to accomplish with this. But he also made this dig that if they were supposed to be an allegory to World War I or II, that both sides would have just tried to make new rings of power and then subjugate people. So I think at least socio-politically, he might be a little more woke than he gets credit for. I feel like the common criticism is that some of the character designs are racist, which we can get into when we get to, especially like the orcs, I think are the one that are most commonly criticized.
I've heard some criticisms about like the dwarves being sort of like caricatures of Jewish people. I haven't looked into that a whole lot, so like I definitely would like to do more looking into that, I guess.
Yeah, and to be clear, we are not cool with that. But I want to really
criticizing, but these books are definitely multifaceted in a way that it can be criticized for some things and praised for others.
Yeah, exactly. And I think at the end of the day, like we said repeatedly, like we're more interested in a nuanced conversation about what's there on the page than we are about praising or shaming. Like it's as a result at times is going to be kind of surface level, but I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much everything from the forward. Let's get into the prologue.
Nice. So section 1 of the prologue is concerning hobbits. Opening my book, sorry for those who hate the sounds of pages.
I don't know, we could go into like an ASMR thing, kind of whisper, page rustling.
Yeah, and so this one was definitely where it felt the most like I'm reading a passage from my old English class.
Gotta study up on these hobbits.
Yeah, because it's just about like the like anthropology of hobbits and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Did you notice that? I mean, like, it's unavoidable that he has to bring up in the context of the Lord of the Rings universe that the events of The Hobbit took place and have been recorded.
Mm-hmm.
But this man is just shilling Bilbo's book. He sounds more like an advertiser than like a anthropologist of Middle Earth, man.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I am not the person to explain this in the best way, but from what I understand, all of these books are meant to be, they're sort of almost like found footage.
It's like Blair Witch Trials.
Yeah.
Fuck, that's not what it's called. We'll bleep that.
Yeah, it's basically like found footage for or I guess it's like akin to discovering a book that was written in the Middle Ages for and like just publishing it, where basically Bilbo and then later Frodo and Sam are like the sort of authors or collaborators for this account of the War of the Ring and then the events of the Hobbit as well. And so from Tolkien's perspective, because he was, very famously a linguist, and so they were writing in the language that hobbits would have actually spoken in this world, which is, I believe it's called Westron.
Hey, man, you're going to know better than me. This man is linguistics through and through.
And so his role is not so much to like write. He isn't necessarily the author of the story as much as he is the translator. And so there are certain names that have been changed so that they have a more semantically accurate meaning in English, and that like they were translate. So I think that Mary, for example, is a good example where Meriadoc is like a Welsh name or something like that. That's like it's a pretty obscure name even in circles where it might come up. And I have no idea what Mary's name is in Western, but it's got a similar sort of thing where you wouldn't normally hear it, but then it can also be abbreviated to mean happy in the common language, and so Mary is abbreviation? Shortening. Yeah, a shortening. It's a nickname for Meriadoc.
What's the word?
And Mary means happy, and so it's like there's that similar process is happening for a completely different set of sounds that would be a name in Western.
Yeah, and I think kind of on that point, specifically about Tolkien's reproduction of it, like it is at some level sort of a frame narrative, in that respect, in that it's implied to at least be faithful to Bilbo and Frodo's collective account of the events of like the wars in this universe, and their journeys. But I think that can partially account for some of the like biases that might be showing up as like, are they Tolkien's or not? Who knows? But I think the reader that's committed to suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, there's a plausible deniability.
Yeah, and again, that's not to defend.
There's an unreliable narrator.
Yeah, it is like hobbits are the ones that are recording this. They are very likely as pretty suspicious people, I would say, like among, all of the different races in The Lord of the Rings. They definitely are on the conservative side in many respects, or at least the isolationist side, which we'll get into heavily in our discussions of hobbits. But you can take with a grain of salt some of their interpretations of things, I would say. So that might be something to kind of keep in mind as we're going through the plot and the characters. there's still dialogue present in the book, so it is
Right.
from this almost like when you're reading it, it feels like third person, like omniscient, basically.
Yeah.
But it's you can almost believe that the author was reproducing these conversations.
Right.
So there are some definite like weird considerations to bring into like how you approach.
Yeah, and it's book. Also, if you do want to do as little suspending of your disbelief as possible, you can sort of think like the concerning Hobbits section of the prologue explicitly says, for the most part, that Hobbits aren't typically concerned with any sort of history or record keeping aside from genealogy.
Yeah. And
so, like, with that in mind, it's basically Bilbo and then later Frodo and Sam sort of inventing their own Hobbit-specific version of that history telling. And especially if history, like, if it's largely just inspired by, like, an earlier oral tradition or something like that, I could see that taking on their historical text just looking a lot like prose, you know? And so, like, that's just one way you could look at it, I guess.
But let's get into these hobbits.
Yeah.
Are they concerning? Should we be concerned about them?
Let's find out. So, for some reason, I underlined that they seldom wore shoes since their feet had tough, leathery soles and were clad in a thick, curling hair, much like the hair of their heads, which was commonly brown. I don't know why I felt the need to take note of that. That's obviously something I knew about Hobbits.
Yeah, they got some hairy MFing feet, man.
Yeah, they need the curly girl method for their feet.
That's what I'm saying. Drew, if it makes you feel better, I also recorded something about this. Mine was just their feet are so leathery and hairy that they don't wear shoes. Does that mean there's no Hobbit sneakerheads?
Yeah, probably.
They're not waiting on the new Supreme collab. This is severely disappointing to me.
Yeah.
That Hobbits don't have massive shoe collections.
I'm gonna have a hard time rooting for these guys.
I know, no hype beasts in the Shire. This is.
They do. There might be some boot heads. I think that they said that some of them wear boots when it's raining.
Okay, well,
but
I just can't imagine those being crafted for aesthetic purposes.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, though.
Yeah.
We're going to need to call up J.R.R. himself and get an opinion on.
What's he up to these days?
Yeah. Oh, goodness.
But, yeah, if you are unaware of what hobbits look like, so I think we're both going to probably assume to a degree that, like, anybody listening has some background knowledge related to Lord of the Rings, but we're still going to try as much as possible. So forgive us if it seems like we're spoon-feeding some information to people.
You love this slop, don't you? You just eat it up, man.
But, yeah, so hobbits, they just kind of look like guys for the most part, and gals. But they don't wear shoes. They have hairy feet and big feet, and they're short. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
They wear overalls.
That's pretty cool.
Sometimes straw hats.
Hey. Did you also get the sense these hobbits, they sound Midwestern as hell. Do they not? I'm kind of talking out of school here because I've never been to the Midwest. They sound, in terms of their like relative like cultural conservatism mixed with like really liking to drink.
Yeah, I bet
beer.
they have a healthy appreciation of dairy.
Yeah, I would say so. The only difference is like with all their houses built in the sides of hills, like it's a little less flat than the Midwest. So I'll forgive them for any differences in practice, but
yeah,
I was definitely struck by I wouldn't necessarily want to hang out with most of these guys.
I think I could take very well to the Hobbit lifestyle.
I don't know, man. The living in Hobbit holes, that is a goated move.
Yeah.
Would you not take the opportunity, like instantaneously, to live in like especially a nice Hobbit hole?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I had really realized until my reading of this, and this might be more in chapter 1 than it is in the prologue, but just talking about how, like, the holes are really only, like, the super wealthy, relatively speaking, hobbits, and then the super poor ones that live in holes still.
Yeah. A lot of
And-
them have freestanding structures. Isn't that
Yeah.
bonkers?
It's kind of a letdown, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, I
feel
guess
like,
there's only so many hills, and if your population grows more than your hills grow, you got to do
Truly,
something else. But,
truly. Now you can bring in the Hobbit army corps of engineers, and they can probably bust in some sand and build some new hills to tunnel into. But barring that, yeah, they kind of just normal people, but short with hairy feet.
Yeah. Prologue also mentions that there are 3 somewhat different breeds of hobbits: the Harfoots, Stores, and Fallowhides. The Stores, I wrote a note about them. It says river folk ? So, and then it does later on mention, when we get a little bit of Gollum's backstory, that they're like the river folk, which is what Gollum like I guess still is, but spoiler alert, not anymore. But
He's looking busted instead, but we'll get into that. My Gollum heads know what I'm talking about.
But yeah, so the Stores, they live by the banks of the great river Anduin, and they were less shy of men.
Did you say andouille?
Yeah.
These hobbits are Cajun?
But yeah, and then the Harfoots, they live pretty close to the dwarves, I think, is their main thing, and so they're, I guess, a little bit more dwarf-like hobbits as opposed to. So I guess the Fallowhides are sort of the main ones that we think of as hobbits.
I definitely related to the description of the multiple kind of like subcategories of hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
That is just totally glossed over in the movies.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of has to be for time's sake, but
yeah,
it was interesting to read about.
They could have handed it out in like a pamphlet in the theaters.
I know. We need to. Hey, I'll have some of my underlings get on that for any of our devoted listeners. So write in $7.99 plus shipping and handling if you would like your guide to the sub races of hobbits. No, but that was not so striking as much as the description of what proximity the hobbits are to like non-hobbits, especially dwarves.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they've always been framed in any kind of Lord of the Rings related property as off in the middle of nowhere by themselves.
Yeah.
No interaction with the outside world.
Yeah.
When in reality, there's tons of trading that they're doing with humans and dwarves and elves even. Maybe less so the elves, but like when we get into discussions of like the looming threat to Middle-earth, it's clear that they're getting updates. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
Is that it's not so much geographic isolation as that they were just totally unknowledgeable of or unconcerned with the outside world. And I do think there's a resistance, but these hobbits are a lot smarter than I think they're painted to be in the movies.
Yeah. I did like... So it talked about how some of the hobbits a long time ago crossed the Brown River Baranduin, which was like the elvish name for this particular river. And then it talked about later that years later, they use the word reckoning a lot. Did you notice that? I don't use the word reckon enough. I don't think I ever think of it as a word meaning remember.
They committed some atrocities that conveniently got left out. Tolkien is actually running interference for hobbits.
Yeah, it's not really a remembrance; it's just a reckoning.
Yeah, he's sugarcoating our history. We'll put it that way.
But the year that they crossed it, it says, "Thus began the Shire reckoning for the year of the crossing of the Brandywine," as the hobbits turned the name became year 1 of the Shire.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really like that really scratched something in my linguist brain of like, this guy understands how like topography or topographical names can be changed based on like folk etymologies and stuff like that. Because it's like Baranduin is like I said, it's Elvish, but these shires these hobbits, they don't speak Elvish.
These dang shires.
Yeah, these shires.
You think a man?
And they were like, well, what does that sound like? Brandy wine, whatever the hell that is. So yeah, that just made me happy.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. There's it almost sounds like the hobbits have like a functional history by virtue of the lack of recorded hobbit history for one reason or another. So there's almost like a hobbit diaspora. It's kind of weird. But hey, the ones we know and love, they're in the Shire, man. The background about the other kinds of hobbits is interesting, but hey, give me that Shire hobbit info.
I don't want a dwarf hobbit.
Yeah, come on.
Piss or get off the pot.
Well, did you have any other thoughts about concerning hobbits? Because otherwise, we got to get into the most important element of the prologue by a country mile.
I think that's all I had to say concerning hobbits.
Hey, well, if you take nothing else away, these hobbits, they like genealogy. And what's that other word, Drew? What do they like?
Pipeweediology.
That's right. Concerning pipeweed. These hobbits, they're low-key dank. I think we can say that.
Yeah. I mean, so it says that their pipeweed, or leaf as they call it, is a variety probably of Nicotiana, which I assume is more related to tobacco, like nicotine.
Shh, don't tell the people that.
But, it definitely seems like, especially in the movies, that there was an effort by somebody, possibly Peter Jackson himself, to make it not necessarily resemble Nicotiana.
Yeah, I think he might be referencing
different Anna.
Yeah, one of those Annas. So there's a couple of different varieties or strains, as I'll call them. There's the one that sticks out to me is Old Toby.
Yeah. Long bottom leaf is, that sounds pretty good.
Hey, smoking that long bottom leaf pack, man.
That's what they have in the second one in the movie, right?
Yeah.
That's what they find. Yeah.
Oh.
Southern Star sounds like the racist hobbits probably smoke.
Yeah, give me a couple Pall Malls and some Southern Star. Can you imagine hobbits dipping?
Oh man, they'd love it.
Old Toby just packing a fat lip.
More like Skull Toby.
Yeah, that's right. Oh goodness. Yeah, I had because Long Bottom Leaf and Old Toby are both directly referenced in the movies. I'd never heard of Southern Star.
Yeah,
but that's definitely the one that seems like it'd be the easiest to market to try and get teenage hobbits addicted to pipeweed.
Yeah, they were definitely the ones doing the most like subliminal advertising and stuff like that.
For sure. But yeah, there's really not. Did you also... Okay, so I made the comment earlier that some people find just The Lord of the Rings in general, really anything that Tolkien writes, insufferably long-winded.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I mentioned it earlier. I read The Hobbit as a kid, I think like 4th or 5th grade, because it really is meant more so for children. Like I think that was the intention. So it definitely goes down a little bit smoother. Mm-hmm. But I took my first crack at the Fellowship. Is it the Fellowship of the Rings?
Yeah. The book we're reading.
I cannot believe I blanked on the title. Sorry, people. You can come and disbar me. That's my bad. I took my first crack at Fellowship in 9th grade, and I distinctly remember the section on pipeweed lasting for 55 pages. It is, I think, all told 3/4 of a page. it is insane what our brains remember. Like,
Yeah.
I think I did not go into it. I think I went into it with a moderate level of familiarity of like the aesthetics of the movies, and so I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And then when it was somewhat nonfiction,
Gonna be like those fast-paced Lord of the Rings movies.
oh yeah, yeah. Especially, hey, time flies when you're watching 11 plus hours in one sitting, man.
Just eating cheese.
But I was struck by how much easier this was to read as an older person. I say older. We're both about to turn 23. We're so much wiser. but I think I do have a lot more patience for the world building, like we were talking about.
And especially like having just finished undergrad at UGA, like I had to read a lot of actual like journal articles and stuff like that, and it's like, even though this is written in almost the exact same style, it's at least like not about like the usage of aspiration in like the P sound of like some random Slavic language.
Yeah, and for those of you who are curious, I've for years at this point read like 3 to 7 academic journal articles per week. So reading for pleasure at all is a godsend by comparison. So I will forgive Tolkien his trespasses on this point.
Yeah, but for those who are against any sort of long-windedness, like as those who would tend to criticize Tolkien for being long-winded, I will say this is probably the worst way you could start reading.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think my appreciation for his work is totally divorced from my appreciation of his PR priorities. Like,
yeah,
most people are not going to want to start off with, like you said, like basically an academic treatment of a fictional world. Like, hey, man, you ever read one of those nonfiction books where it's got like the color picture insert in the middle? Put some of that in there.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing? And I will say, for those of you who want to stick around but maybe are turned off by how in-depth this is, the minute we get into the book, the plot picks up so much more quickly.
Yeah.
Like there's actual dialogue and things.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, it's not just about genealogy and
trade routes,
nicotine varietals in Middle Earth.
But yeah, it's you. I mean, honestly, like if that was such a big turnoff, I feel like you could probably skip this part and come back to it at a later date, and it wouldn't be that big of an issue. Just like don't tell certain Tolkien fans that.
Shh, I'll never tell.
And also, I think we can forgive Tolkien for that because he didn't know he was creating an entire genre, basically, or like revamping an entire genre when he was writing this, and just doing the best with what he had. And he definitely didn't know like the course that like modern media consumption would take.
No.
He didn't know how much you needed to like hook your reader.
Oh God, can you imagine what he would say about TikTok?
Oh man, he'd love it, I think.
Like one of those videos where it's the person dancing and pointing to like blocks of text. I can just picture like the elves doing one of those like questions I get about the Undying Lands.
Dwarf questions I get about our language. Why won't you let anybody else learn your language?
That's actually classist. I don't know, man. Well, that's pipeweed, man.
Yeah.
I think we could do an episode just about pipeweed and be happy, but we'll keep this train a rolling. Did you write down anything on the ordering of the Shire?
No.
God.
I don't think I did. It's just about like local government or something, right?
Yeah. It walks you through, and like I this is where Tolkien does lose me. Is like ultimately so little of the book takes place in the Shire in the grand scheme of things that it is merely helpful for the reader to kind of paint a picture of the society that hobbits are from, which does, I think, it's very pastoral sounding. It's very ordered in so many ways. And I think that juxtaposes nicely with, like, the chaos that these characters are about to encounter. Mm-hmm. But, like, I don't need to know which family names control wealth in the Shire. Yeah. Like, although I will say, Peregrine Took, those Tooks are the real enemy in the Shire.
Yeah.
Class traders, man. They're taking all the resources.
Yeah.
I think
it was interesting to find out that, like, all of the main hobbits in the story, except for Sam, are, like, exceedingly wealthy for the most part.
Yeah, I think, I think they maybe should have used some of their privilege and given up their spots for some lower income hobbits to go on the journey. That's parody. That's a legitimate political opinion I have. I'm just making fun of this. But the one thing that I did find exceptionally funny is that the hobbits, like, it goes into their police force. Do you remember? Did you write
sheriffs?
What'd she say?
Sorry, is that what you were gonna say? They're called sheriffs.
Sheriffs. I don't remember that. I remember they were called the
sheriff, but the E is an I.
Tolkien, man, come on. I know you wrote a lot, but that's just lazy. I was gonna say they call, maybe this is more like, you know how, like, English people will refer to the police as, like, what do they call them, like bobbies or something like that.
I don't know.
I think the Hobbit, if they're called sheriffs, I think the Hobbit version of a nickname is that they're called the Feathered Caps, and they're, like, super informal. Like, they're really just to kind of, like, when something bad happens, like, ideally what emergency response would be. Yeah. But we won't get into policing in modern America necessarily. I did think it was funny, the idea that the hobbits would find, like, because they're not for, like, law and order, it's more about, like, maintaining, like, the society, like, them seeing them as unnecessary.
Don't get out of their pins and stuff.
Yeah, and, like, wanting to defund the Feathered Caps.
Yeah.
You gotta be careful.
Oh, I will say, I think that he probably did call them sheriffs because the word sheriff is, like, derived from the same root as shire.
Oh.
There's a myth out there that the word sheriff comes from an Arabic word that I think means, like, overseer,
like sharif.
Yeah, but different. I'm pretty sure it is actually from a Celtic root, which is, like, in, like, because, shire is in English names like Worcestershire and stuff like that. So yeah, he probably was doing it right by his standards to call them sheriffs, but it's just, it comes across very funny through a modern lens.
Hey, you learn something new every day, folks. I am not going to have any of this trademark linguistic insight. So if that's what you're coming to the show for, hey, Drew will hook you up. He's the language plug, as it were. I'm more of the hey, this is a jokes pod. I'm a little bit of a jokester myself. I low key try to be funny. That's what I bring to the table.
Keyword try.
All right, this might be a really short-lived podcast.
So section 4 of the prologue is basically just so it's titled "Of the Finding of the Ring," and it's basically previously on the Lord of the Rings universe.
Y'all know this one. Y'all, I didn't take a single damn note for this section.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Because it's just, hey, the Hobbit.
Yeah.
This old wizard dude and a bunch of dwarves get Bilbo to come along as a burglar with them.
Yeah. And so I will say, full disclosure, I have read significantly more of The Hobbit than I have the Lord of the Rings books. But I've never finished that book either. I always get to right around the same spot, like when they are encountering the elves, or they're wandering in the forest right before they encounter the elves. Not in Rivendell, but like after, when they like meet.
Is it Mirkwood Forest?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I guess I don't know. I have always lost steam historically. Depending on how well this series goes, maybe we'll take a look at it again.
Hey,
Um,
y'all write
I'd
in the
love to
comments.
say that I've finished it. So
Yeah, drop us a 5-star review and a comment if you want us to look at The Hobbit next.
Yeah.
Prequel season.
We probably should provide some of the information.
Oh yeah.
Just for those in case they haven't read The Hobbit or whatever, or seen any of the movies. But yeah, it talks about so the main character of Lord of the Rings one of the main characters is Bilbo, or is Frodo. In The Hobbit though, it's Frodo's cousin Bilbo, and it takes place like what is it, 60
about 60
years before. And yeah, so Bilbo one day gets a knock on his door from Gandalf and some dwarves, and they take him on an adventure to help reclaim their lost kingdom because they need a burglar.
Yes.
Because their kingdom I said it was lost. It wasn't really. It was stolen by the dragon. Are we going to say Smaug or Smog?
I'm torn on this. I hate being the asshole that's like, it's actually Smaug. But I do think Smaug sounds cooler than Smog. Because Smog just sounds like smoke.
Yeah, smoke fog.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
so
fair. We'll say Smaug.
Yeah.
Canonically on
Cool.
Oliphaunts Motorcycle Club, the pronunciation is Smaug.
And hey, you don't like it? Go listen to another podcast. We don't need you.
Go listen to a Smogcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so basically, like along the way, Bilbo finds Gollum. We'll have to on a later date discuss if we're gonna call him Gollum or Smeagol, or Smeagol. We should be the wild card that calls him based on the accent mark in Smeagol.
Could we do a combo of Smeagol, and Gollum? Some kind
That's
of
probably
mashup.
what we'll end up doing,
Cool.
honestly.
Smaulum.
Smaugol. Oh God.
Oh jeez. Yeah. For all these people that have never encountered this,
Bro, what if
bro.
What if Smaug turned into a Gollum?
Dude,
He got the ring.
Dude, that would be so epic.
But yeah, so previously for about like 500 years or so, Gollum had the ring, and that's what extended his life and turned him into from straight Smeagol to all Gollum.
That's right.
But Bilbo won it from him, arguably may have stole it from him by cheating him. But we won't get into that right now.
We don't take a stance on whether what do I have in my pocket is a riddle or not.
It's not, though.
Right? Like, I think we should just admit that...
Sorry, there was a mosquito hawk that I had to kill.
Yeah, folks, this is a good time to bring up, we are not professional podcasters. There's going to be rustling. There's going to be mosquito hawk smacking. There's going to be little kitty cats walking through the frame every once in a while.
We're going to be too far away from the microphone sometimes.
Hey, this is an ambient noise pod. You don't like it?
Yeah. You're not even supposed to be paying attention.
Yeah, come on.
You should exclusively be using this to fall asleep.
Yes, please. So yeah, Bilbo has an encounter with the former river folk.
The river folk formerly known as Smeagol.
The Smeagol, formerly a river folk, which is similar to a hobbit. Kind of think somewhere between a person and a hobbit, I would say.
Yeah.
With their own culture and language, presumably.
Who knows?
Who finds the ring after, or who comes into possession of the ring after killing his brother, who found the ring at the bottom of the river Anduin while fishing.
Or Andwine.
Or Anduin.
As the hobbits would call it, maybe.
And the ring that they find, we come to find out, is the One Ring, the most powerful ring, like, crafted among the, like, sets for the men, dwarves, and elves.
We'll get into more of like how the history of the ring is laid out in the next episode.
But this ring is just supremely powerful, and
it's honestly not that important for the story, to be honest.
Yeah, it's kind of like probably the weakest
we
link.
just thought it was neat, you know? Love a bit of jewelry lore.
Yeah. So the biggest thing, and this is independent of the story, is that when you put this ring on, it turns you invisible. Not necessarily to everyone, which will come up much later on in the story.
But Bilbo was able to use it to turn invisible enough to get away from Gollum and back on track for the Hobbit.
But the other aspect of this ring, again, that we'll get into, but specifically when it comes to Smeagol, now Gollum, is that this thing corrupts you pretty much absolutely. Yeah. Like, it will give you, like, weirdly, artificially long life, like, physically, but it, like, starts, like, just eating away at you, it kind of sounds like, and driving you to madness. Yeah. So Smeagol is, like, he is, like, obsessive about the ring. He, like, lives in total darkness because he can scarcely stand the sun.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad. Bilbo, on the other hand, in The Hobbit and in the years afterward, he really just gets unnaturally long life.
Yeah, he's relatively covetous of it still, for sure, but like, and in the later chapters, Gandalf talks a little bit about, like, you know, the Hobbits have always been relatively unaccounted for by a lot of the Western or the Eastern races, like those of Mordor and the elves and whatnot. And so, like, with that in mind, there could be something unique about Hobbits that makes it so that they can't, or they aren't as quickly corrupted by the ring's magic.
Yeah. Something about those hearts of men, man. They
damn.
There's just something about them. They see that ring. It's like me with onion rings, you know. But anyways,
that's the real Lord of the Rings right there. Matthew with an onion ring.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But basically, all you need to take away from The Hobbit, if you don't have any background knowledge, is it's really ultimately the story of how the ring comes to be in the possession of Bilbo.
Yeah.
In the Shire.
Right.
And I think that pretty much takes us up to the start of the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, any other thoughts? I had a couple of things that I wanted to touch on.
That's pretty much it for me. So, yeah, you go ahead.
You know, I really like how much detail is in this chapter at this point in my life. And we mentioned how insufferable it can be to some people. But I really depend on extensive detail of characters to really have a good to be able to picture them, because and something we talked about off mic was how difficult it is for me in particular to read about these characters without just picturing the actors that play them in the movies.
Right.
So the more information I can get about Hobbit sensibilities and can kind of sketch out what just an average Hobbit does, says, looks like, it really helps me to understand and like access the more the less dialogue driven parts of the story. So that's something that, again, might be a deal breaker for some, but again, it's that whole thing that we just went over. It felt like monstrously long when we were little. Yeah. It's 20 pages.
Yeah.
It is really not too bad.
Yeah.
So don't feel, hey, we were able to stretch it to an hour, but don't feel like it's going to take nearly that long to get a feel for.
Right.
And man, can I just say it? I love that, like, the defining characteristic of Hobbits is that they're just blowing smoke rings, man.
Yeah.
They're just chewing.
Yeah. Yeah, they were like talked about. There's one wizard who probably was Gandalf, I am assuming, who was able to like rival them in their, like, it said that was like their one art form that was like purely a Hobbit's to perform. you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just very interesting.
Like, they're not exactly, like, good time folk, but they know how to have a good time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think...
Yeah, they're honestly very, like, rude to each other all the time.
Yeah, they are. We'll get it. We will see that in full force as we start reading the description of Chapter 1.
Yeah.
But they definitely... Y'all know that kind of person where they're like, I would give the shirt off my back for somebody, but then they're just an asshole to everyone.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I still believe them at some level that they would go the extra mile to help someone, but they are going to complain the whole damn time when they're doing it. That's Hobbits in a nutshell.
Yeah.
It's like...
Maybe this is just a, like, distinction between, like... Because, you know, we definitely just think of them as, like, country folk, you know? And maybe this is a cultural difference between southern or like southeastern American country folk and like British country folk in some way, you know.
Yeah.
And so Tolkien was almost definitely drawing from the latter of those two groups
For sure.
if he wasn't just completely making it up from scratch.
And I think that's actually a good spot. I mean, you already mentioned where we're both living, different parts of Georgia, but we are from the South. I never think of myself as having a Southern accent, but we both definitely do.
Yeah. Oh, you should have. I started one of our test runs with a "Hey y'all."
Yeah, Drew looked at me shamefully. We both have like Southern imposter syndrome, I think.
Yeah. Growing
up, I mean, let's just say it, like pretty much liberal atheists in the South. Sorry if that's divisive, but it's just true. And I think we both struggle with, like, to what extent am I allowed to be, like, Southern in word and in action? Like culturally dominant. Like, obviously the non-problematic parts of, like, Southern culture. But if we ever seem like we're slipping into, like, a twang, I promise we are not trying to put it on. We both just love some country music, man.
And we also definitely are also thinking about the fact that we just sounded like that.
Yeah. Hey, call it what you will. It could just be a neurodivergence, but we are nothing if not self-reflecting to a fault.
Yeah. Also, you can't make fun of us because we're neurodivergent and minors.
Yes.
So.
Parody. Drew, you're going to get us on some government watch list. If for no other reason than that we're speaking with such foul mouths for minors. Well, I mean, I think that just about wraps it up.
Yeah.
That is...
We'll probably be more off track in the later episodes. We obviously had a fair amount of business to take care of at the beginning of this one.
Yeah. Well, people, this has been Oliphaunts Motorcycle Club. This is where we would normally put all the plugs, but we are lazy. We are lazy and busy enough that we've not done any of that. So it'll be in the future episode description.
Yeah, it'll exist by the time the episode is out.
Yes.
So.
Maybe we'll add a post log to this.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
If I can get Drew's lazy ass to know.
Good luck.
All right, folks. Thanks for sticking around. We'll be back next episode with a discussion of chapters 1 and 2 of Lord of the Rings, Part 1, The Fellowship of the Ring.
Yep.
We'll see y'all around.
Have a good one.